So, when I was around 9 or 10 years old, I used to play football in a local team who had their outdoor practices not very far from where I lived. Because it wasn't that far away, me and a friend who was on the same team used to take our bikes there together. The easiest way to get there is to go on a long walking track that for a long time used to be where the trains went. But they later took away the train tracks and put cement on the ground. So today it's a long walking trail that many dog owners love to use when walking their dogs. There's some parts along the track that have small woods surrounding them, but most of what surrounds them are houses. So you feel quite safe when you walk there at night. It is always lit up with a strong light so you can at least see 50 meters ahead of you with no trouble. So one night, it really wasn't that late, it was around 7 or 8 o'clock. Me and my friend were riding our bikes back from practice. I have no memory of what we were talking about, but I remember laughing and joking around. We were just about to turn down from a sidewalk onto the long walking track when we saw a man who came walking from the direction we were heading. I remember how slow he had walked and how he kinda looked off, like something wasn't quite right with him. He stopped just in front of us and just stood there, looking at us. And because it was a small uphill, we had to jump off our bikes so we could get up safely on the walking track. I remember how quiet it got between us and how big his eyes looked when he followed us with his gaze. When we passed him, it felt like he wanted to grab one of us so quickly we jumped back on and continued. In the corner of my eye, I saw how he turned around, facing our way and the same direction he had just come from. And then he started walking behind us. It just seemed so weird, but I wasn't scared at that moment, just uneased. My friend had also noticed how weird the man acted and told me we should go a little bit faster, so that's what we did. We both looked back after speeding up a bit and could see to our horror how he started half walking and half running behind us with his eyes nailed on us. "Faster," my friend shouted and took off with me behind. I tried to keep up with her, but fell back a little bit. I was about ready to pee my pants when I looked back to see the man with his long legs running like a maniac right at me. I remember her yelling, "Faster, faster, faster!" How she kept looking back when I no longer dared to because I was too scared. It was then that we saw an older woman coming from the sidewalk. We finally dared to stop, but when we turned around this time, the guy had thrown himself into the woods and was nowhere to be seen. My friend told me afterwards, after we finished crying, that the biggest reason why she kept screaming was because he was just a few inches from grabbing my bike. I can't even imagine what he was planning to do with girls that he had managed to catch, drag them down into one of the small woods and have his way with them. It just seems so odd that he took his chances with 2 girls at the same time. It sounds horrible to say, but I'm pretty sure my friend wouldn't have stopped if he had gotten a hold of my bike, so thank God he didn't. It may not sound so scary, but it was just his eyes, like he had totally lost it. So, crazy-eyed man, let's never meet again. When I was growing up, my family and I lived in an apartment complex. My sister was 12 and I was 9. It was a young family that lived directly above us with one little girl. One day my sister and I were playing outside and we noticed a man on the balcony above us, staring at my sister and smiling, almost grinning. He was in his mid-20s and completely average looking. I, always being the outspoken one, looked up at him and said, "Hi, who are you?" I knew the family had never seen him before. He just chuckled and said, "A friend," and walked back into the apartment. I was always playing outside and hardly ever saw him. The only times he would come out was when my sister would come out to play with me. One day we were playing outside, late in the day, when we smelled cigarette smoke. We started looking around and saw the man standing in the dark corner of the balcony. He, again, was just watching my sister. I then asked him again, "Who are you?" He gave us the most sadistic look I've ever seen, and walked back inside. That night, I told my mom about the man who lived upstairs and how he would stare at us. The next day, my mother went up and spoke to the lady who lived there. She told my mother that they were letting her husband's friend and brother stay with them until they could find a place of their own. My mother expressed that we were feeling uncomfortable playing outside because the guy would come out and look at us. The lady said it was completely harmless and that we shouldn't have worried about it. Months went by and the same thing kept occurring. My sister would come out and he would immediately be on the balcony watching. One day he came downstairs though and tried to play ball with me. He asked me how old we were and what school we went to. He then asked if my sister got home before me. I told him I was telling my mom, and he just laughed. I looked up and noticed his friend was standing on the balcony. They both looked at each other and smirked. I started calling for my mom, and the guy left. My mom came outside, and I told her the guy was bugging me again. She went back upstairs, but this time the lady said she was waiting for her husband to get back because she was going to ask them to leave. The next day, some cops showed up to our apartment and wanted to ask my sister and I some questions. Apparently, when the men left, the lady found pictures of my sister all over their room. They also found underwear, which didn't belong to us, in their room. The lady was afraid that they might have done something bad to her little girl and called the cops. I don't know what happened because we moved shortly after, but creepy pervert upstairs? Let's never meet again. This story happened when I was about 7 years old. When I was younger, my family used to go out to this lake in Arkansas called Norfolk Lake. We would go down every year in July to camp, boat, and swim. It was always a great time, although this time, my mom and dad decided to go camping for 3 weeks. I don't know if any of you go camping or not, but after the first week, you're pretty much done. At this particular location, there was this pretty awesome playground area that my brother and sister and I went to pretty much every day. It had the works: swing set, jungle gym, seesaw, hurricane spinner, spring riders, tetherball, you name it. And the best part about this area is that there were never any kids there, so naturally, this is where we spend most of our time. A few days in though, we began to notice a white van with tinted windows in the parking lot. At first, we didn't think anything of it, but every single day, it would show up. Nobody would ever get out, and nobody would ever go in. It would just sit there. I was pretty young at the time, so it didn't really bother me that much. But I could tell my brother and sister were pretty freaked out by it. What really scared us was that we would see it drive by our camping area very slowly a couple of times a day. So we decided to go to this other playground, which was a little out of the way just to avoid the white van. This seemed to work. We hadn't seen it for about a week and actually had forgotten about it. Until one day. We were all hanging out at the new park with this new friend we made. I was swinging on the swing set by myself. I was kind of a loner as a kid, while everyone else was out catching frogs or something at this nearby creek. That wasn't within eyesight. I was just chilling by myself when, sure enough, here comes that white van. I was frozen. I tried to scream out to my brother and sister, but they were too far away to hear me. The guy got out of his van. All I remember was that he was smoking a cigarette and had a very dirty yellow t-shirt on. He was walking straight towards me. He lifted up his hands and motioned for me to come with him. Right when he got about 30 feet away from me, my parents pulled up with our truck and called out my name. Immediately, the guy changed directions and walked towards the woods. I had never been so happy to see my parents in my life. We grabbed my brother and sister and I told my parents the whole story about the guy in the white van. We got back to camp and started packing right away. We have not been to Norfolk Lake since. What really scares me is that he would drive past our campsite every day. He knew exactly where we were sleeping. This incident occurred a few years ago, and I'm still amazed by my absolute naivety at the time. It was a typically dull night in the suburbs of England, and myself and my best friend decided to go to a nightclub a few towns over. There was really nothing else to do at the time. As per usual, we had a few drinks, and by the end of the night, neither of us knew our ass from our elbow. A very smart state to be in for two 20-year-old petite gals out alone, but c'est la vie. Anyway, my friend made very good friends with some guy that night. I myself was really upset about a relationship gone wrong and not in the mood for hooking up with some random dude from a bar. However, we stuck together more or less for most of the night. I was the perpetual third wheel. By 3 a.m., the club had to close their doors, and with no trains running and no money to fund my own taxi home, I agreed to split a taxi with my friend and her new acquaintance. We clamber onto the first one we see at the taxi rank, stupidly not checking if it's a company we recognize or even a licensed one. The ride begins without a hitch. We discuss sleeping arrangements for the night. I live a 15-minute walk from my friend, and though she offers me her sofa, I insist I can walk home from hers without any trouble. Another idiotic assumption, but I was tired, upset, drunk, and just wanted to wake up in my own bed. We got to hers, pay the driver, and huddle up on her porch for a quick smoke. As I bid adieu and start walking home, I realize the taxi driver is idling in the street a few houses down. I shrug it off, believing he's just either checking his navigation or taking a call from another ride as I walk by. However, the window quickly winds down. "Hey darling," he calls. I jump up and nervously wave a weak hello to him. "You say you live near, right? I'll give you a ride for free." I politely decline and say I was fine to walk, but he starts insisting. "No, a girl like you will not walk alone at this time. Please, you said you live nearby. Please, I'll give it for free." Cautionary tales briefly flicker through my mind, but in my exhausted and inebriated state, I thank him and approach the taxi. Perhaps he's very generous and a thoughtful taxi driver. It was another stupid decision. As I go to open the back door, he tells me to sit in the front because it's more comfortable. And yes, I foolishly took the seat right next to his. If this was a horror movie, I'd be the first one to die. I tell him my address, and the ride again begins innocently enough, for a minute. The route to my house should be simple enough after all, but before I know it, he suddenly veers into a small side street that goes into the complete opposite direction. At this point, my palms descend into a full-on sweat mode, and my heart starts to beat like a bongo. We've heard all the horror stories, but this won't happen to me, surely. I tell him that I don't think he's going the right way, but there was no response. I then demand, much more firmly, to know where we're going, but my voice seemed like a squeak to him. To my surprise, though, he then slowed down the car to a halt, but it's then I heard the audible click of the car lock. If I gave him an ounce of credit before, it's all wiped out by now, and my mind and body are obviously telling me I'm in big danger. He looks at me too thoughtfully. "Look at you. You're so sad, but so beautiful. Why is this?" I was speechless. "Your friend, she leaves you, yes? That boy with her, he doesn't choose you? He chooses her over you?" At this point, I was completely frozen in my seat. I've never been so completely frozen through fear. Any rational thought in my mind is gone. He continued, "You're too sexy to go home alone. I'll take you back with me. I'll appreciate you. Not like him. You're too sexy." I sat a few frozen seconds more, then suddenly heard a guttural "fuck off" come from somewhere in my voice. Still in my seat, he then slyly tells me, "Okay, I'll let you off if you kiss me like a good girl." At this moment, he quickly slides his hand between my legs and leans forward. And it's now that I finally scramble for the door lock. He very suddenly turns back and starts up the car, but luckily, due to the slow starting pace, I'm able to open the door and stumble out onto the road. And my bag around my front, thankfully. I sprinted for my life down the road and wound my way around a few side roads that I knew before and hid behind some industrial bins. When I eventually stumbled home, massively shaken up, I like to note that my mom was amazing and looked after me. I realized that this isn't as horrific as the spine-chilling tales that I oh so love to read on here, but it was a terrifying realization on how many violations can arise when you least expect it. So creepy taxi dude, let's never meet again. Also, everyone, please try your very best to pre-book a taxi, or at the very least check their license and or note down their plate. I live in a small village 25 minutes from the nearest city, It's a great place and great location, nice and quiet with beautiful countryside and nobody is a stranger. If the city calls, which it often does as most of my friends live that way, then it's an easy bus journey, although it never runs on schedule. The most annoying aspect of living in this place is that the bus runs directly from the city center to my village, making its final run at 8 p.m., but actually arriving at around 8:30. Now, I'm 23, and before I was 18 and other ages where drinking and partying were very common. This meant that I could never actually make it to the bus at around 8, so I was left with 3 choices. I could either sleep on a friend's couch, I could get a taxi, or I could get the bus that passes closest to my village. On this particular night, I was 19 and had visited the casino alone and lost all my cash. This meant that options 1 and 2 were out of the window, so I headed towards the bus stop. This bus journey is super quick, even more so at 2 a.m. on a Thursday morning, and before long my stop was nearing. Unfortunately, being rather inebriated and dwelling on a poorly played hand on blackjack, I fell into a daydream and although it was only for a second, I missed my stop. I got up quickly and pressed the button and heard a ding. A minute later, I'm at the next bus shelter over and deciding my move. It's December, it's cold, and it's raining. The snow on the ground is turning to mush, and the dirtied shoes of passerbyers has diluted the lovely white with an unhealthy and dull-looking gray. An empty McDonald's bag tumbles by and piques my misanthropy. I drop my cigarette and step off the curb to pick it up. Gray mush flows over my low tops, and now I'm miserable. It's a 5-minute walk back to where I should have left the bus, and a further 25-minute walk back to my house. It's a well-lit road, and the road has been salted. There's no cars at this time, so I can have a relatively comfortable walk home, if not a bit lengthy. Or I can take the cut through the woods. It's sure to be muddy and dark, but it's 15 minutes quicker. I'm already as cold as I can get. I should have gone the long way. I'd done this walk plenty of times, but always during the day, never in the dark. The wall of a warehouse and spiked metal fences of its yard keep you in from the right. Next, it's under the railway bridge and out onto the wasteland. Up until this point, I was feeling pretty comfortable. It's a creepy place at night for sure, but I knew there was no one nearby when I entered the cut, so no one would be coming in behind, and there was a faint glow from the lights in the factory yard. They let me see what was ahead of me. I had my headphones in until the wasteland. I stood in the open now. The cut was behind me, an empty factory was ahead of me. It was locked up for the night, or maybe it was just abandoned. It's full of old rusted cars. To my right, there is a small wooded area, and to my left, a larger woods. The ground I'm walking on has been ruined by kids riding their quad bikes around in the day, and the rain has made it only worse. The light from the factory was gone now, and I nearly slipped. I was reminiscing about all the wonderful walks I had on the lit and salted road to mine, as I let my eyes adjust to the dark I was now in. At this point, I got a very strange feeling, and I was almost sobered instantly. Now this feeling has been described plenty of times around here, and described well enough that if you haven't experienced it firsthand, then you'll still have a good idea of what it must be like. It's the feeling that you're not alone. It comes from your gut. And let me tell you, when you should be alone, there's nothing more unsettling. I could have turned back, and a light jog would have had me there in about 2 minutes. I'd have a half-hour walk home, but at least I'd feel pretty fucking comfortable during it compared to right now. However, I couldn't see anyone. I couldn't hear anyone. There was just no way anyone could be out here at this time. I just laughed to myself as soon as I wrapped up in my warm bed, which was only 10 minutes away if I carried on. By this point, I'd been thinking what I should do for the couple of minutes, and it occurred to my paranoid mind that by now someone could be well on their way through the cut and towards me. So I continued on quickly with my earphones, no longer playing, just to be safe. The last part of the walk that can be considered creepy is the walk between the larger woods and the factory. The path I was turned up, and the puddles of sludge and cold water were more common than that solid ground. It was so dark. that I ran my hand along the rusted panels of the empty factory's fence to keep me on track. Careful not to lift my hand too high in fear of cutting myself on the barbed wire I knew that ran along the top. To the left was the woods, and after a brief look into them as I entered the path, I decided that they were sufficiently nope to not look anymore. The trees were so bare and threatening, and it was so dark that I couldn't see more than 10 feet in. It gave the illusion that I was further from society than I actually was, and I didn't like it. I sped up, and then I was falling over. I tripped over a large stone on the floor, and it sent me tumbling to the ground. Luckily, I didn't land in a puddle, and was no worse for wear as I got to my feet. That's when I heard snap, snap, crunch. Even remembering that noise will ruin even the calmest of my moods now. My eyes widened and stomach became the floor. Instinctively, I span around to see who had stepped out from the woods, and I saw him as he stepped out onto the path, first facing away from me briefly, as if to check behind him and then towards me. He was 15 feet away and was extremely tall, over 6 feet by a fair chunk, and he was broad. His hair was long, and it covered half of his face as it hung over his head, either looking straight at the floor or up at me. I couldn't tell. I was totally sober now, and although I was aware, I was breathing heavily and couldn't hear myself for the sound of my heart in my ears and chest. I wanted to say something that made me seem like I wasn't an easy target for whatever he wanted. Wha is all that I managed, and he just stood there, saying nothing. I didn't know what to do. I could run at him and fight. I could run into the woods, or I could ring the police, quickly. I did my best to calm myself to think clearly, but right then, he started to walk towards me, slowly, but deliberately. He lowered his head to the ground, even further. I just turned and sprinted. I heard heavy splashes behind, and knew that he wasn't just walking now either. I just fucking sprinted, praying that I wouldn't be caught, and praying that I wouldn't trip or fall. I ran out of the woods. I kept sprinting up the hill through the park, waiting for his hand to grab my shoulder at any second. I sprinted through the streets as I grabbed my house keys from my pocket. I jumped over the fence and got straight into my house, locking it immediately. I didn't look outside. I never peered back as I was running. I'll never know how far he chased me or how close he came to grabbing me. And I really hope I'll never know what he wanted. Big creepy man who was waiting in the woods to chase me? Let's never meet again. Edit. Here's 2 pictures from Google Earth of the area. Blue line is a rough idea of the route I took. Also, everyone gets the vibe from this story that I'm a girl, but that wasn't the case. Hey everyone, it's Mr. Spooky again, and I just wanted to say that, again, the links to all the stories used in this video are in the description. Also, every name of the author who wrote the story is also in the description, just to give everyone who actually wrote the stories credit, because I don't want you guys to believe that I wrote these. I didn't. I do narrate them, and it is a lot of work, but they're the ones who deserve all the credit. So go check those out on Reddit if you want to. Also, if you just want to go check out more scary stories from Reddit in general, the link is in the description. I won't take up any more of you guys' time. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.